In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the principles of photography, what they are, and how you can apply them in your photography.
As we mentioned, I have a history of graphic design. That's what I studied when I was in school. And so we have taken those and we have applied them to photography. And that's what we think about when we are working on all of our images. So the first principle is contrast, and that is how different things are within an image. So you could have high contrast where things are very different. You could have low contrast where there's kind of not really a lot of difference between things that are in a photo. You can create contrast using things like the textures that you use. You could use maybe a really smooth texture and then a more rough or fluffy texture with it. Or maybe you could use color, and that can create contrast as well. You could have two colors that kind of contrast each other, or you could have colors that are very similar, and that will create a lower contrast photo.
The next element is balance, and this has to do with the weight that each of the items in your photograph carries. So there are two main balances, which can be asymmetrical or symmetrical. And asymmetrical can look like all of the items in your photograph are to one side, whereas symmetrical is more all of the items in your photograph are evenly spaced out. So symmetrical balance can look a lot more planned, whereas asymmetrical can look a lot more accidental.
White space is like the blank space within an image. So you can have an image with a lot of white space. Maybe there's just one object in the photo, or you can have an image where there's very little white space and the image is very filled. Maybe there's a lot of props going on. So one thing you want to think about is just making sure that there is room for the eye to rest within the photo. So if there's too many things going on, there's not going to be space for the eye to breathe. So just making sure that you leave at least a little bit of white space within your image, even if you have a lot of props.
Another important principle of photography is emphasis, is the most important part of your image. So in product photography, this can look like the product that you are featuring. And this doesn't always have to be the case, but depends on the visual goal of your image.
So another important principle is movement. Movement is how the eye moves through the image. Typically, you want the eye to start at the most important part, at the emphasis, and then move its way through the rest of the image.
Next is proportion. This is the size of your props and items in your image and how they relate to each other. So larger items can draw more attention, whereas smaller items can be a little bit more behind the scenes.
Next is repetition, and this is repeating elements within a photo to make a point. So this could be repeating colors, you could repeat props, you could even just repeat a theme throughout an image or throughout a series of images.
The last principle of photography is color. Color can evoke many different types of emotions and feelings. Learning color theory will help you understand what colors communicate and how they work together.
So you don't need to apply every single one of these principles in every single image that you create, but you should think about each one and how it can apply to the images that you're creating.
One other thing is that you want to make sure that all of the principles in your image, work together and are unified.
And you have to know the rules in order to break them. So studying these principles and learning how things are typically done will help you then when you need to break the rules or maybe do something that's a little bit more unconventional.
In the next lesson, we'll talk about choosing your product and doing some research.